In today's tutorial, we'll create a scene with a bunch of instance box frames with some 4D rotation. The focus here is going to be on building the scene, so we aren't going to get into the theory and the mechanisms involved. If you're interested in that stuff, check out the videos in the RayTK intro series. We'll be using RayTK version 0.32, so make sure you're using at least that version. Check the video description for a download link. Start by dropping the toolkit talks into your project. I like to do that at the root outside of the main project comp, but you can put it wherever you want. First, we'll set up the renderer. Open the palette with the Alt-R shortcut and create a RayMarch Render 3D. And then add a null top connected to the first output so you can see the rendered image. Select the renderer and open RayTK's Editor Tools menu with Alt-Shift-R. And then under Add Camera, we're going to choose Look at Camera. On the camera, increase the FOV angle to 80 and change the position to 0, 2, and 5. Select the renderer again and open the Editor Tools menu with Alt-Shift-R. And then under Add Light, choose Point Light. On the light, we're going to change the position to 4, 8, and 4. Next, we'll set up the SDF. This one's going to be pretty simple since we'll mainly be focusing on modifying it rather than on the initial shape. Open the palette and create a box frame SDF and connect it to the first input on the renderer. On the box frame, decrease the thickness to around 0.02. Then open the palette again and create a round operator and insert that between the box frame and the renderer. Increase the amount to around 0.02. Doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the thickness in the box frame, but the idea here is to give it a little bit of a roundness so it doesn't have as hard of edges. Next, we'll add the 4D rotation. Create a rotate 4D operator and insert that between the round and the renderer. Try adjusting the rotate parameter and see how this causes the shape to kind of invert on itself, kind of around the x-axis there. But instead of just using a single amount of rotation everywhere, we'll use a sine wave to vary it along the x-axis. Create a wave field operator and connect it to the second input, the rotate field input on the rotate 4D. Now, because we're dealing with angles and degrees, we need larger values than this, so for the amplitude, set that to 40. Now this gets a bit messy, so let's spread that wave out a bit more. So increase the period to 8. Now try adjusting the phase parameter and see how you get that rotation kind of moving across the shape along the x-axis. We'll add some animation on this later on. Next, we'll create and combine multiple instances of this shape. Create an instance operator and insert it between the rotate 4D and the renderer. We aren't seeing any changes yet, since the instances are still all on top of each other, so we need to spread them out by rotating them different amounts. Create a range transform and insert that before the instance operator. Now we need to hook up the index of the instance to this range transform. So select the instance operator and open the editor tools menu with Alt-Shift-R, and then under reference variable, choose normalized index. This gives us the number of the instance scaled to a 0 to 1 range. So regardless of how many instances we have, it's always going to map that to a 0 to 1 range. Connect that to the index field input on the range transform. Then on the instance, increase the count to 4. Next, go to the range transform, and we're going to switch off enable translate, since we're only going to be doing rotations, then switch on enable rotate. And for the y-axis of the second rotate parameter, increase that up to 180. So now we have 4 copies that are rotated from 0 to 180 degrees. Next, we'll set up the material. Create a modular mat and insert that between the instance and the renderer. Then, with the modular mat selected, open the editor tools menu with Alt-Shift-R, and under Add Diffuse, choose Oren Nair. Increase the albedo to 1 and the roughness also to around 1. Select the modular mat again, and then open the editor tools with Alt-Shift-R, and then under Add Specular, choose GGX. Then increase the Fresnel setting to 1. Then choose 2 different colors for the 2 different types of shading. For the diffuse, I'm going to use sort of a pale orange. And then for the specular, I'm going to use a pale green. But feel free to use whatever combination of colors you want. Next, we'll add another level of rotation that happens before the 4D part. We'll animate this rotation so that it first rotates on the x-axis, then y, and then z. Create a rotate operator and insert that between the round and the 4D rotation. Now what we need is 1 channel per axis, increasing sequentially. Create an LFO chop and set the type to pulse. Every time this pulses, we're going to increment the next axis. So add a count chop, and then add a fan chop. On the fan chop, we're going to change the channel names to R, and then open square bracket, X, Y, Z, and close square bracket. So that's going to give us 3 channels there. Then on the outside range setting, change that to loop index. This gives us 3 channels that flip on and off in sequence. Add another count chop. Then add a filter chop. And then a math. And on the math, on the multiply page, I'm going to increase the multiply to 90. And then add a null chop to the end. Now we have 3 channels that smoothly increase by 90 degrees sequentially. Open the viewer on the null chop and drag the RX channel onto the X part of the rotation on the rotate operator. And choose chop reference. And then do the same thing for the Y and the Z. So now that box frame is first rotating on the x-axis, then y, and then z. Next, we'll add some animation to the phase of the wave that's controlling the 4D rotation. So go over to the wave field, select that operator, open the editor tools menu with Alt-Shift-R, and then under Animate with Speed, choose Phase. Then on the speed generator, decrease the speed multiplier down to around 0.1. And that's it for our scene. To recap, we're using a box frame SDF. It's being rounded out a little bit. That's then being rotated sequentially on each axis. Then we're applying a variable amount of 4D rotation along the x-axis, controlled using a sine wave that's being animated on the phase parameter to shift the wave. Then we're using instance to create and combine multiple copies of that shape, and using range transform to rotate them by varying degrees, starting at 0 degrees and going up to 180. Finally, we're using a modular matte with diffuse and specular shading for the material. And then we're sending the result of that into the renderer. That's it for today. Check out my Patreon to support RayTK development. You'll get early access to tutorials, exclusive scene downloads, and more. Thanks for watching, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe.